Hi, I'm Doug Block. I'm the founder and one of the four co-hosts of the D-Word. And I am really thrilled to be here today to talk about two topics that, come up occasionally in these discussions that we have. Um, uh, Funding and distribution. I have no idea why it's so popular, these topics, but they are. And so we are, this session is about, we talked about being about what to worry about, what not to worry about, and what to prioritize with the funding and distribution for your film. And there is really nobody better to talk about this with than our special guest today, Keith Ochwat. Um, by the way, somebody I have more admiration and respect for really than almost anybody in the business. He's amazing. He's a film producer, a funding and distribution strategist, and entrepreneur extraordinaire, and the founder of Show&Tell, which you'll hear a little bit more about. Their mission, I love their mission. It's to help filmmakers connect with their audiences and make money. And he and his team recently tallied up all of the revenue they've helped filmmakers raise over the years in PBS underwriting and partnerships, licensing, and virtual events. And it came in north of $13.5 million. So that's impressive. And we will talk about how to do this. First of all, I'm going to take myself off of, I'm like on a spotlight view. So all I'm seeing now is my face in the thing, which is very distracting. But I will, Keith, why don't you come on? And first of all, welcome. Great to have you here. And tell us, just tell us briefly what Show&Tell is. And then we're going to start off with kind of a maybe 15-minute presentation you're going to give that talks about some of the big shifts and current trends that are going on both in funding and distribution.
Well, thank you, Doug, for that really warm welcome, and I really appreciate that, and it means a lot coming from you and from the D-Word that you appreciate the work that we're doing, and I really my motivation for helping filmmakers in fundraising and distribution, and that's really what I'm focused on. There are plenty of resources out there for production, plenty of resources out there for other types of networking, which I think are so important and have been so important in my filmmaking career. But I'm just hyper focused on one thing, career sustainability. And that manifests into fundraising and distribution. I really appreciate your kind words, Doug. I've looked up to you for the 18 years that I've been in the been a professional documentary filmmaker and now educator. And so thank you, and thank you to the D-Word. And I know there's a number of members of our community here today, some of whom I haven't seen in a while, like Allison Argo, hello. And many I got to see yesterday in a Show&Tell webinar, like Bruce, hello, and Mark. But I think if you're in my community and not yet part of the D-Word, you've got to join. Right now, there's so much changing, and I think that's kind of the crux of what we want to talk about today. Is there's so much change, and I think in so many ways, we feel anxious. I mean, I feel a little more anxious these days because I became a father not too long ago. And so that anxiety is like a little different new flavor. But there's just a lot of anxiety. It's an election year and it's a mean, horrible election already. And, there's AI looming, and there's this, I live in LA, and there's this big Apple TV Plus shoot for a show called Shrinking next door to my house. And I was talking to the location managers about how much production is moving from LA to Atlanta to Toronto. I mean, the sense of change is overwhelming. And I think that needs to be reflected, and just kind of and just acknowledged. And I think reflecting on it, I think it's really important for us, as Doug said, and kind of as we framed this conversation today, to think about what should we really be concerned about, and what and maybe where we should let go a little bit and just kind of focus on what we need to do. A big thing I talk about with filmmakers in the show and tell community is prioritizing. And it's not just prioritizing what project, what should I be doing this much post-production work right now, and this much fundraising, and this much networking, and prioritizing festivals or not, or I'm not talking about that kind of prioritizing. That's important, but it's also about prioritizing our energy, prioritizing our kind of limited time and focus. It's really important, and so that's something I hope when we leave today, you can end this webinar today, you can have a sense of what to like let go of a little bit, and what maybe to hold on to, and maybe explore a little more if it fits into your plans. So what we do at Show and Tell, I'll put a link to our website, and then I'll put my personal email address here. We're all documentary filmmakers. And feel free to say hello. But over the last 4 years, I've been running Show and Tell with that focus of helping helping filmmakers build sustainable careers through fundraising and distribution. And when I started this work, when I started my first film in 2006, it was frankly a different world. 2006 was before Netflix started streaming. They started streaming in earnest in 2007. They were still a DVD mailing service. I was still renting DVDs at Blockbuster, which declared bankruptcy 3 years later after I started my career. And we've seen so many big shifts, and so I want to talk about the big shifts. I want to talk about what maybe is against the grain for maybe how you're conceptualizing the way you want to release your film and fund it. And then I want to talk about a couple opportunities, but leave plenty of time for Q&A. Now, I'm a fast talker. I've had my espresso, and I'm going to talk fast because I want to get through a presentation. This is recorded, so please don't worry about taking notes. Just watch and absorb, and put questions in the chat. We want to have as many questions as possible. As Doug said, the key thing that I'm doing with Show and Tell is helping educate filmmakers, but I'm also releasing a couple films because I think a lot of the ideas that I'm practicing right now to generate audience and revenue for the films I'm focused on, I don't think those strategies are going to work in 5 years. And I want to know what is the next thing, because the world is moving fast, and we all need to be humble. We all need to be curious and flexible in this complicated time. And it's hard to practice, and it feels uncomfortable, but it's a place that we're all in together. And I think that's what's so great about the D-Word, and what we try to do at Show and Tell is provide some community where we can commiserate and support each other, because frankly, being a documentary filmmaker is lonely. I always felt lonely doing it. And these
But to be clear, Keith, you're not a distributor, so people should not be sending their cuts to you, right?
I am only distributing as much as I must to keep on top of my game to educate. So I'm not a distributor. I'm distributing 3 films right now, doing work with PBS and partnerships and educational sales. But yeah, that today really my purpose is to teach and to guide. So Doug, should I share screen and just
Yeah,
jump in?
let's take it away and go right to the mini presentation here.
All right, we're gonna do it mini. So I apologize in advance. I am a fast talker, and I am gonna talk fast, but I do have some ground I want to cover before
And
we
like
jump.
Keith said, feel free to put questions in the chat. We normally save the last half hour or so of these for camera. We can come on camera and ask questions, and we'll try and do that as well. But Keith's really good at looking at the chat while we talk, so he'll take note of questions you put up there.
So let's jump into some big shifts that we all are noticing, we are all feeling, and is kind of the table that is set for us right now. Huge changes are happening in how we finance our films, how we premiere our films, and how we share and stream our films to audiences. So we all have heard about the news at Hot Docs that the Canadian government is going to be limiting, curtailing, reducing, and maybe disappearing quite a bit of the funding that has gone to this festival. I think it's either the top or the second biggest documentary festival in North America. We're seeing that Sundance is likely moving from its longtime perch or its forever perch in Park City, Utah, that less and less documentaries are getting acquisition deals and bidding wars and all those things out of their premieres. I've worked with a number of filmmakers at this point who have had premieres at Sundance, and their films are just sitting on hard drives still. And that is just frankly I think one of the worst case scenarios that could happen with a film that we really work hard on to bring into the world. And we're seeing longtime production companies like Participant Media come to an end. Participant brought us Inconvenient Truth. It's brought us narrative films like The Green Book, American Factory, a doc I love, and they're calling it quits. So there's a lot changing. There's a lot changing with streamers and their buying habits, frankly, their acquisition habits. And now that the dust has settled after the big strikes last year, we see that Netflix is stronger than ever. And when I talk to the location manager and when I talk to the location manager and the staff that's on this big shoot for this Apple TV Plus series, I sense that his union, he's in the Teamsters union, which is coming up, they're going through negotiations now, contracts up in July. I worry that the labor, the professionals, the community working in Hollywood is not as strong as before the strike. There's a lot changing, and you know, let's talk with an area that we're all interested in, focused on: festivals. Festivals. I love festivals. For the next film that I'm producing, I'm going to premiere at a festival. I love festivals because I've made friends there. I've made contacts there. I was just in touch with, a person I admire in the documentary field, Sky Sitney. She was the festival director for AFI Docs when I premiered my film Age of Champions, and she gave me a shot, and it helped launch my distribution. But and I've made so many friends I'm still in touch with today. But the thing is, for whether you're at AFI Docs, you're at Tribeca, I have friends at Tribeca right now, they're not coming home with deals, even though they desperately want one. And even if you were lucky enough to get a premiere at Sundance, those filmmakers are less and less securing distribution at festivals. There are other values for festivals, but it's not to secure distribution. It's just not. Big streamers relied on festival programmers for years to curate what audiences might like. It's like, hey, let's let these programmers do the hard work of watching 1,000 films and tell us what are the best 16 that audiences might like. Now they have algorithms to do that. They have data. And frankly, what they've learned is that they want more reality TV. There was a great New Yorker article about, Love is Blind and this like 6-season behemoth of the reality TV dating show. Go on to Netflix. I was watching the new David Chang Dinner Time Live series because I thought it was kind of an interesting format. And I was just looking at like the homepage for Netflix, and I'm like, holy, what is all this stuff? It's like every dating show you've ever heard of, every, like a lot of true crime. It's just like, it's not the Netflix I think that we thought of 5 years ago. I'm not to say it's bad. In fact, more people like it now, but it's just not for us. And festivals were an important part of the streamers strategy. That's why we saw those big acquisitions, but that's not the case anymore. Big production companies. I talk to filmmakers all the time that are still hoping to get money from XTR or, participant, recently people were still talking about that, or Concordia. But the reality is that with smaller acquisition fees from streamers, these big money production companies, they're shutting down. They're, focusing on safe bets. Look at the documentaries that were acquired at a Sundance this year. They were produced by Will Ferrell, or they were about Superman. Of course, there are outliers where great, esoteric, interesting, quirky docs are making deals, but it's the exception, not the rule. And so, with streamers, they've obtained hundreds of millions of subscribers. And here's the thing, the reality that we need to reflect on and just accept. These are huge corporations. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying they're focused on stock price, subscriber growth. They're in the streamer wars, the Netflix versus Hulu versus Disney Plus, and we all know who's winning that fight. But, the reality is that they're not our ally right now and probably ever again, because they're just focused on other things that make them more money. And, to be frank, and to give them credit, Ted Sarandos and the leadership at Netflix, they're honest about it. They're like, hey, they fired a bunch of their documentary staff not too long ago, and they said, listen, we're looking for programming that's going to bring us 25 million viewers, not 2 million viewers. And that's, reading between the lines, not too subtly, they're not looking for working with us anymore. Independent films that help them grow, it's not part of their focus anymore. They used to be more focused on the long tail of content, and it's different now. Um, they're looking for programs that have built-in audiences, that have that well-known intellectual property, that have the, cinematic universe, that have, other attributes that we as independent documentary filmmakers don't have. And, it's a trope now to say that streamers are more focused on true crime, horror, and celebrity-driven documentaries, but there's been great data out there from leading thinkers like Peter Hamilton who have crunched the numbers. And I know it may be a little hard to see, but what you need to know is that the blue graph that is growing for everyone, um, significantly, um, uh, except Disney Plus, is true crime, and everything else is, growing slowly or shrinking. So, and then when I'm talking about different themes, different genres, travel, biography, different documentary topics, art and culture. So that might sound, you might be like, damn, Keith, this is like, what kind of Cassandra are you? This sucks. Like, well, so what? So what do we do? Remember, this is about letting go, right? So the good news is that a lot of these big changes are distractions. They're great articles, and they get a lot of clicks on IndieWire, but they're not really relevant for most of us when it comes to our opportunities out there. Because frankly, we've been outside of the system. We are outside of the system, and we will be moving forward. So a lot of these changes are distractions. I would love, raise your hand if you have premiered at Sundance. Some of you have. Raise your hand if you've received funding from participant. Very few of you have, maybe almost none. Raise your hand if you've made over $100,000 on a Netflix deal. Like, I congratulate you, and that's great, and try to do it again. But it's just the reality is that for the vast majority of us, there are 130 people in this virtual room right now. For maybe all but 5 or 6, we said no to all three. I did. I do. For my 3 films, I've produced from the ground up. And the last point I want to make is it's important to embrace the power of independence. We're independent filmmakers. We're documentary filmmakers. There was this, when I started my career in 2006, I followed just the enthusiastically the careers of filmmakers like Caitlin Boyle, like Gary Hustwit, and I was so amazed at their DIY approach. And then a couple years later, Netflix started streaming, and a couple years later, they started buying films at festivals, and a couple years after that, Everyone was trying to get that streamer money. And guess what? That gold rush is over. You know, I'm from Northern California, the birth of the gold rush, and we're a gold rush state and country, and that gold rush is over. That sugar high is over, and independence is and embracing our independence is where we were. It's where we have been for the vast majority of us, for 125 out of 130 of us, and where we're going to be moving forward in the future. Um, so, you know, distribution is happening less and less with a single distributor, a single buyer. Filmmakers are reaching more global audiences, and working with some streamers still and working with global platforms. Yes. But there's often more of a nuanced approach that's necessary. I advised a filmmaker that just made a deal with ESPN for her film about a marathon in San Quentin prison, 26.2 to life, and Christine Yu. And you know, she was able to carve out some rights, and she made a deal on for their streaming platform, but also she's doing screenings with parole offices in states across the country, at prisons across the country. She's making educational materials that are funded by a foundation. She's been able to hold back those rights. So working with big companies can be good, and you should try, but also know that there are other opportunities, and splitting rights is going to be really important. So filmmakers I'm working with, and I work with thousands of filmmakers over my career that are finding financial success right now, are splitting their rights. They're working with either multiple distributors that have specific track records of success. They're working in specific geographies. They're retaining often a lot more rights so they can do more themselves. We all are doing something really crazy, making a documentary. It's not logical. It's because we're passionate and we can't help ourselves. So no one is going to care more about the success of our film than we are. We care more about our success, and we are going to bring our films to the world better than anyone else. So retaining rights often and splitting rights and working with distributors in a collaborative way is the way I've been seeing a lot of filmmakers that have had the most success. I just want to highlight real fast, and then we're done, Doug, and then I'd love to open up to questions. One of one of the three films that I'm releasing right now did not go to festivals, was in a community that I coach called The Circle, and the film My Ascension is about teen mental health. And you know, we've been able to tap into partnerships with non-traditional funders and partners in a really powerful way. It's been closer to a year at this point that I've been leading the distribution. But the 6 months before that, the filmmaker really, during our circle program, was testing audiences, experimenting, failing, succeeding in small ways. But we learned, as I've started distributing the film based on what he learned in those audience testing months, we learned that children's hospitals love the film, educators love the film, recovery centers, public health departments. And we've been using the film as part of mental health and awareness and suicide prevention efforts. We've made $720,000 in revenue. That number is actually a little outdated, but closer to 800 now. And within a year, and by the end of this year, my goal is to be over 1 million. And you know, I wanted to do this with a film that didn't go to festival, doesn't have any celebrities, one person band making the film, Greg DeSherry, very talented filmmaker who just cares about this topic. He himself is a suicide survivor. And we are just doing our damn best to navigate this complicated world, and also to show our community of documentary filmmakers that there are other paths out there. Last one I want to highlight is the one I referenced, Christine Yu's film 26.2 to life. She's worked brilliantly. Christine's worked brilliantly with partners, working with the shoe brand Hoka, the Strava running app, the Just Trust Foundation, which literally told her, we've never funded a documentary before. We don't fund documentaries. And she said, that's cool. I'd love for you to support our community engagement campaign focused on prison justice. They said, cool, we'll fund that. And that's what she needed money for. She's made over $200,000 doing that. She worked with a shoe brand called Fleet Feet, who bought a number of tickets for a limited theatrical that she did. She's done screenings with policymakers like the California Parole Board commissioners, who literally decide people's fate. in terms of freedom or imprisonment. And she was also acquired by ESPN. And so you can stream her film on demand. So, you got to be creative. Every film is different. I'm distributing 3 films. The distribution strategy is totally different. And we all need to be creative and flexible, and also not too down on the fact that things are changing. But I just want to remind you all, we as independent filmmakers, our fate has been always been in our hands. Look, read the history from Robert Flaherty, the first documentary filmmakers, to the activists in the 60s and 70s that really changed environmental policy and did so much in our country. And we come from a really amazing heritage of documentary filmmakers, and these filmmakers have done it their own ways. Ken Burns, for his first film about the Brooklyn Bridge, sold underwriting for a PBS broadcast. And he offered it before he'd even secured his PBS broadcast. There's a great podcast interview with him, a podcast called How I Built This. And it's amazing to hear he's doing what a lot of us are doing in our community right now, hustling, working hard. So, Doug?
Yeah, Keith, well, you talk a lot about partnerships, and it's really interesting because so much of funding and distribution is intertwined, particularly when it comes to partnerships. You speak often about how Age of Champions, speaking of Sky, and crunching numbers, earned over $1.5 million in revenue, and when you crunched the numbers yourself, you saw that only 4% of that revenue came from sales to Netflix and Canopy, that everything else came out of partnerships and conferences and things like that. So I'd like you to speak a little bit more to that, because it actually, and how it relates to funding as well as to distribution.
That's a really, really good question. And I want to share my screen one more time. I've
Sure.
actually, I, I didn't even know how much money we were making with Age of Champions. I was just working my ass off for almost 2 years on distribution, and we had a lot of failure for about 6 months. We premiered at AFI Docs. Sky gave us this chance. I did start some relationships with groups like AARP because they were based in DC. But frankly, I was still trying to make a deal. There was like a releasing company that wanted to, that was going to acquire our film. The best deal we almost took was an all rights deal for 7 years for $75,000, which these deals don't even, a lot of us would take that deal now because we're like, oh my God, there aren't even acquisition fees like that now. For most of us, I thought about taking that. And if I took that, we would not have made $1.5 million, reached 3,000 plus communities for our film, and done all the weird creative things that had to do to release our film and make a living. I was a documentary filmmaker for 12 years. I never did a commercial job. I only made documentaries. That's how I lived, and I was poor, but I, was able to make a living that way. So when Peter Broderick reached out to me and wanted to do a bulletin on our success, um, I crunched the numbers. I talked to our accountant, who was a volunteer accountant, so didn't do a great job. It was a mess. And then we pulled up all the numbers. And like you said, Doug, we made $1.5 million, but the different kind of top line areas are partners, revenue from events, a lot of speaking fees. And I can talk about what I would have done differently there. I did too many events and charged too little. It was really stressful to travel that much. We had an online store where we sold licenses for our film. And then we had our revenue from grants, which was relatively small. We did a very small Kickstarter campaign that was also very stressful. Revenue from online streaming platforms and revenue from sales agents, distributors. We worked with Passion River, which is now defunct. We worked with Collective Eye, which did a solid job. We worked with Canopy, and then we made a Netflix deal. Netflix deal was for $50,000. I'm a bad negotiator, so I got 50% of that went to the sales agent. And then so I kept $25,000 for an 18-month global deal. This is when Netflix was making deals. That's what, if you talk to a lot of filmmakers who make Netflix deals, they look like mine. And the annoying thing too is Netflix pays over 6 quarters, so they pay you like, you're giving me $4,000 checks. What is this? And so our revenue from distributors and from streamers, we worked with Canopy and Netflix. We worked with pretty respected distributors, was less than $60,000 of $1.5 million. Majority of our revenue came from relationships. I say partnerships a lot, but it's relationships with organizations like AARP. I mean, here's the mind-blowing thing. Of all of this money that we made and all of this impact and all of the screenings that we were able to organize, I thought about it some more just actually in the last handful of years. The majority of this revenue came from 6 relationships, 6 partnerships. AARP, one of the top nonprofit senior living organizations in the world, in the country, called Leading Age, a healthcare company called Cigna that we probably have heard of, um, uh, uh, a senior recreation company called Silver Sneakers, and a couple others. They raised the awareness. We never bought ads. They raised awareness in their big networks. They paid for events. They, invited us to their conferences, and these relationships fueled this massive success. Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, can you talk about, let's say we've identified a potential partner, somebody that we think, an organization that is kind of aligned with what the film we're making is about. How do you best approach a potential partner? Do you cold email them? Do you want to have a pitch deck with it? Do you want to when's it appropriate, say, to send a sample? You don't want to necessarily do it the first time you reach out. What are some tips you have about how to form a partnership?
It's a really good question. It's something I talk about a lot. And I want to start with the thesis and the simple kind of big picture idea. And then how to do that can take a number of different avenues. But the big idea that you should all take away from you see a big partner and you're like, I want to work with them. That would be game changing. That could make everything different with my distribution and my fundraising and money in my pocket. The first thing you need to do, the biggest thing you have to do, and it's absolute must, there's no way around it, you have to understand how that partner would benefit from a relationship with you. Any partnership is mutually beneficial. AARP worked with us not because they liked us, not because I made a great pitch and had a great deck, but because at the time they were getting a lot of blowback. It's an organization for older Americans, and some of them are conservative, and they were getting a lot of blowback for their vociferous support for Obamacare. For years they got a lot of got a lot of heat, and from a lot of their members. So they had this campaign called "You've Earned a Say." I don't even think it exists anymore. And they were doing live events in different cities, especially in really kind of purple states, and they were trying to like hear from their members. And sometimes they did music, sometimes they did art shows, sometimes they did films. And that's how they were doing something and they needed us. So that was a big part of how we started our relationship. From there, they ended up sponsoring our PBS broadcast and did a few other things because we had a relationship, but that's how we started. Leading Age, the biggest senior living kind of network, the reason they needed our film was because they were spending a lot of time and money and effort on this theme of active aging. My film was about the Senior Olympics. So they wanted to redefine what it means to get older. And our film kind of did that in a way, changing expectations. And so we had value for our partners. So the top thing that you will need to do when you have a partner you want to work with is understand what is the specific value you can offer. And then from there, it really is a labyrinth of emails, calls. The key thing that I would say separates successful filmmakers from filmmakers that fall short of reaching partners and building partnerships is polite persistence. AARP, 6 months of unrequited emails to the head of brand
How often? How often are you emailing them?
Um, about every 2 weeks, I would say. And then being a little strategic. And it wasn't the same email every time. It wasn't, hey, David, can you get in touch with me, please? I know you want. It was more like, hey, David, great news. We're just screened at the Austin Film Festival. Here's a photo, attached to a photo. I literally don't know if he opened any one of those emails. And then I became friends with his executive assistant who was like, oh, hey, Keith, hey, think that, don't worry, David will get back to you. He's just busy right now, or he's on vacation. And, making a connection with others in his office helped us finally get through to this person who was the gatekeeper. And I think that's polite persistence. I can talk for hours about email strategy and calls and how to position your film and pitch and talk about a two-pronged distribution strategy. All this stuff I go into in ad nauseum in show and tell. And there's actually a lot of free resources on our website. So, if you're like, this is interesting, I need to go deeper, and I know everyone's on a budget, check out our free stuff on our website. I just put a link in our chat, in the chat, showandtell.film. And I talk about that stuff. But remember, understand the mutual benefit and don't give up. Polite persistence. And those are the things that's what separates the successful partnerships from the ones that fall short.
So again, this I think applies to both funding and distribution. We talk a lot about the importance of building a following, and having that following go to email because we can't rely on social media really to pull audiences in or sell your film. You've talked a lot about the importance of an email list. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that because, we think, say, getting into a Netflix or just a lot of people think getting onto a digital platform is great for distribution because everybody potentially in the world can see it. And yet, how do they know about it? Even on Netflix, it gets buried, So you seem to have this following that you're in communication with. How best to go about building that and talk more about the importance of that.
No, it's a really good question. And I mean, if I had to pick one filmmaker that I would want to be more like,
Gary?
it's Gary. I want to meet this guy.
Yeah.
I haven't met him yet.
Gary,
And
Gary Hustwood, folks.
Gary Hustwit, Helvetica, Objectify, and then his recent film at Sundance. I mean, this
Yeah.
guy is so creative, not only creatively with his filmmaking, but with his distribution. But there's a lot of other examples out there too. But he did a really good job, and I always aspire to be like filmmakers I admire that have built a community and built an audience and take them with them film by film. Sometimes you have different topics, and so it's not just it's not as seamless, but it still can be done because often a lot of our fans are fans of us, not just of our films, and that's important for us to remember. And so the importance of an email list, is that you control it. Yeah, you have to pay for it. You got to use MailChimp or Constant Contact, and that stuff that costs money. But the reality is that I know a lot of filmmakers that put so much effort into building a Facebook following, and Facebook can be a useful tool. I use it for certain things. But the reality is that all the Facebook just changed their algorithm a couple years ago, and it's actually harder to reach the news feeds of your own followers that you built over years unless you boost the posts, unless you pay them money. So remember, as I said with Netflix, Facebook is a corporation, and probably one that a lot of us hold in low regard, frankly. I do. But the reality is that they're out to make money, sell advertising. And so I think with email, that's our opportunity to build this community our own way. And maybe it's small. Maybe it's just 500 people that are just, but if you have 500 people and you get a 70% open rate or 80% open rate of your emails, that means hundreds of people are following what you're doing and they know what you're doing. And if you let them know, this is what I'm up to, this is where I'm heading, this is maybe where I need some help, this is where I need some advice, this is, I'm going to be here screening my film, you'd be surprised how powerful 500 people are. And so I advise all of you to really, whether it's email, whether it's using social, but do the best you can to cultivate a community of people who believe in you. And I think that's really important. Gary's done it better than almost anyone. And that's been, I think, a key part of his success. And I think, and there's been several case studies about what he does. Just Google it. I think, Doc Society's done a couple and read them. They're great. But I think the key thing, Doug, I would tell everyone is that we as filmmakers, we we thought that we could just be creative, but really we have to be more than that. We have to be fundraisers. We have to be kind of our distributors too. And we have to, find ways to build community. And I think that that's, from within our films. And I found email lists to be a great tool for that.
Right. Keith, you also talk about conferences and virtual screenings as ways of generating revenue. Can you talk about those, particularly as you're making the film? I mean, not just in the distribution phase, but as ways to fundraise for your film.
I think conferences have been one of the innovations that I think I was one of the first people to do. I'm not sure, and I don't care about the credit, but the reality is that even today, 10 years after I went to my first conference and talking about it as much as I can, filmmakers are still prioritizing festivals over conferences. And I would say it should be the other way around. I think as documentary filmmakers, conferences are some of the most important gatherings we could go to. Not filmmaking conferences; those you should go to. And like I said, I think going to select film festivals is important and just heartwarming for the process of making our films and finishing them. But I think conferences within what I call target audiences. These are communities of people that are going to care most about your film. These can be professional conferences and gatherings where there's continuing education. These can be, conferences that are focused on a hobby like genealogy. I went to this incredible conference in genealogy in Salt Lake City that helped me connect with a corporation called 23andMe that became a sponsor of a PBS broadcast for a film I was leading distribution on and funded an educational tour at genetics clubs at universities around the country. I, have had a chance to go to conference. This is the way I want you to all think about conferences. Festivals are gatherings of people who share an interest in film. Conferences are gatherings of people who share an interest that hopefully is about the topic of your film. So if your film is about genealogy, or if it's about active aging, or if it's about some aspect of climate change, going to a conference on those topics is a way to reach a disparate number of people, sometimes thousands of people, that all share a passion for the topic of your film, and they all can become allies or event hosts. They may want to bring the film to their university. One of the best conferences I ever went to, there were 300 people there. 300, tiny conference, and I flew from California to Washington D.C. on my own dime to go. But this was the conference. This is the most boring name for a conference ever, but it was the Association for Gerontology in Higher Education. Gerontology is the study of aging. 300 people. These were all deans, but here's the thing. They weren't just people. These were all deans of genealogy departments at universities around the country, and they were librarians, and all of them had credit cards where they could buy an educational license and take it home. Of those 300 people, I'm almost positive 80% or more bought a DVD at the conference. And then conferences usually only attract maybe 50, 60% of an organization's entire network. So there were other members of this association around the country who couldn't make it to the conference, and they sent an email out, a couple emails out to say, "Hey, this film was a hit. A bunch of people are bringing the film to their community. Click on this link to purchase the film and bring it to your library or to your classroom." They did this for us because they really believed in our film and it was beneficial for them. And so that was one of the most important conferences we went to, even though it was tiny. Could you imagine going to a film festival with only 300 people and have like this experience where like, oh, that was distribution changing.
Keith, well, first of all, I've heard of conferences with worse names than that. But what if you're doing a personal documentary or doing a character-driven one that doesn't have an obvious social issue, mission? Um, what do you say to those filmmakers in terms of conferences? Let's say you're doing a film about your relationship with your difficult father. Uh, what do you advise filmmakers in terms of finding a possible conference?
There's a wonderful Facebook group that I'm sure many of you are members of already, that's focused on personal documentaries, and there's a lot of members of my community who are members there, and many of those filmmakers, they're telling deeply personal, vulnerable, important stories that aren't talking head heavy or issue kind of didactic, but they're having success with the types of distribution strategies we're talking about, including conferences. Um, Two examples I'll talk about. So here's what I would say: big picture. Absolutely, your film can be personal, it could be point of view, it could be, and frankly, I think that actually makes your film often connect with audiences better, which is really important. Connecting with an audience, whether they're a gatekeeper for a funder or a partner or a conference or just like an everyday person, viewer, people need to feel your film. They need to connect with the film and connect with your story. And so I think telling a personal story is actually good. I actually don't think it does not in any way disqualify you. If anything, it's an advantage, because your film may have that extra kind of narrative empathy, because it's your deeply felt personal view. Two films that come to mind. One is the film I mentioned, 23andMe, that became a partner for. That film was about the director's search for her biological father. And, that film, Sarah Lamb, the director, came to me with a very similar question like, Keith, I've heard about your model. I read about Age of Champions, but my film's about me looking for my dad. I made this film over 9 years. No one else. I haven't paid. I paid for the whole thing. It's just about my weird journey, and it was a beautiful film. I really love that film. It's called Thank You for Coming, and it's really there's voiceover, kind of poetic sort of soliloquy. It's not like an issue film in any way, but here's the thing. I had a chance to talk with 23andMe, their VP of marketing, who became our gatekeeper and started that partnership. And I asked Tracy straight up, I was like, why did you decide to be our PBS sponsor? Why did you want to pay us $25,000 to sponsor a series of university screenings at genetics clubs? And she said, it's because your film is about creating new family stories. And that's what our technology is meant to do. So people that see your film understand this idea a little better, perhaps, or expose this idea of creating a new family story. And then she also took it one step further. She said, we, and I really appreciated her telling this. She's like, we at 23andMe, we have a retainer. We spend $300,000 a year on a marketing agency to tell customer stories, to put on Facebook and put on, in our blog. And this film that Sarah made is better than any of those. And she said, and this is after the partnership was already made, because it's like, damn, we should have charged more. She said, you're only asking for $150,000, so this is a good deal for us. So she just broke it down for me that way. So I think whether your film is deeply personal, there's a filmmaker, Ju Shen, who is a beautiful documentary about the loss of her husband, and raising her son. and she's in that personal documentary filmmakers organization, and she's done an amazing job going to conferences and connecting with people. You know, her film's loss of her husband, you know, that's a very deeply personal, heartfelt issue she explores. And life insurance companies have really loved her film in a really kind of influential way for her distribution. So partnerships and conferences can really manifest in strange ways. What I
Yeah,
recommend,
what I hear you say, I'm sorry, you're about to recommend
but the
something.
last point I want to make is just ask yourself, what's your film really about? Any personal documentary filmmaker is not going to say, my film's about me, about my family. It's about issues. It's about topics. It's about, you know, things that we're discussing in the zeitgeist.
Right. And it sounds like what you want to do is really focus on who the target audience for your film might be, and really even think outside the box about who, any tentacle of the story might reach.
Absolutely. Think about target audiences, and then just think about what are the issues your film is about. And think more specifically than, you know, for instance, there was a filmmaker I've advised who's been successful recently in her film. I said, what's your film about? How to power a city. I said, what's your film about? And Melanie says, that's about climate change. Like, you got to do better than that. And she says, well, you know, after a few more of those questions, her film, she explains, is about the investments in the green energy infrastructure to at the state and local level to fight climate change. And that nuance has made all the difference for which conferences she prioritizes, what partnerships, and that's really benefit her a lot.
Well, now you get to the crux of it, how we describe our films, how we pitch is like at the core of all of this, and not something easy to do. Adam, you've had your hand up for a long time, so why don't you come, and folks, if you have questions, use the raised hand thing um, function. It's at the bottom, one of the icons on the bottom of your screen. Keith will peruse the chat for questions as well, but I don't want to monopolize the questions here. So Adam, take it
And
away.
this is Julie, the program manager. While you're asking your question, I will spotlight you, and then I'll not spotlight you while Keith gives an answer. And when you're thinking about your question, don't get like too specifically into the weeds. Um, we all want to get something out of the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Doug. Keith, longtime reader, first time questioner. I'm Adam Mazo here in Massachusetts Territory in Boston, and I'm wondering. I've done a little bit of stuff in this space. Done work with REI and some films that we've done. I'm wondering how you approach identifying your partners. If do you look at the entire world of partners and think, I want to work with them, or have you found any good resources for whether it's corporations, nonprofits, et cetera, who actually want to do this work and have people that are actually in these roles where they can build these relationships with filmmakers? I get a little nervous that, like, okay, sure, it'd be great to work with like organization X, but are they actually set up to really collaborate with filmmakers? Do they know how to do it? Do they have somebody to do it? I'm just wondering how you think through that.
It's a
Thank you.
really, really good question, and thank you for your kind words, Adam. I no one has actually ever said that to me before. I love that though, because my dad listened to a lot of talk radio when I was a little kid, and like I always loved hearing that. So to your question, Adam, how do I go about identifying partners? My film is about X, and I see possibilities for partners out there, and what can I do? um because here's the thing, it can be overwhelming. It's exciting at first. You're like, oh, partners, I'm gonna make a list. Then you make the list and you're like, oh my god, this is a long list, or oh my god, this is a small list. Or how do I get in touch with these people? What do I do next? Who do I speak with, as Adam's asking about? One of the key ways that I identify partners is I do a practice called reverse research. And reverse research is just a stupid term I made up that means look at which partners, which companies, which philanthropies, which organizations, which advocacy groups, whoever, who has a track record, keyword, keep term, track record of supporting causes, conferences, initiatives, studies, whatever, other films on that topic. So, there's a film team I worked with out of the Netherlands, and their films about soil health, soil science, topic that I'm really interested in. My wife and I are big native plant people. And so we, they came to me and they're like, well, how do we find partners? They're from the Netherlands, or they're not getting much exposure to this way of distribution. And I said, well, there's been about 7 or 8 films made about soil, different aspects of soil in the last 10 years that I'm aware of, because I like this topic. So the first thing we did is we identified all of the different, we went onto the websites of different films that publicized who their sponsors and partners were. Boom, that philanthropy, never heard of them. They love that, they love Touch the Earth. They'll probably love this film too. Oh, we could see on their events calendar that they screened at all these universities. Great, we should reach out to them. So it's reverse research, and maybe the most prolific way that I've found reverse research to be helpful is through conferences. Now, I really would encourage you all to think about which conferences to go to, but also I would encourage you to just research. If you could go to any conferences that are specific to your film's audience, which conferences would those be? Even if you don't go, which conferences would those be? And then find out who their sponsors are. If your film is about green energy infrastructure, sounds pretty specific, sounds pretty boring, sounds whatever, here's the thing, there's a lot of conferences on that specific topic. And guess what? When Melanie did research on the top conferences in that space, she identified the philanthropies, the venture capital firms, the corporations that are all spending money and have a track record of being engaged in those issues. So,
Thank you.
Doug, real quickly, I see several hands up, probably more than we'll be able to get to. But I noticed, I've been looking at the chat, and I noticed that a number of the hands that are up, like Peter's and Ansley's, I see their questions in the chat. So,
Sure.
Peter, Ansley, can I take your question? Can I answer your questions quickly? And if I answer them, put your hand down. If you have a follow-up, leave it up, and we'll get to you. So,
And Peter, in the chat, I know a number of people wanted a link to where they could find the personal chat doc group. So if you could put that link in the chat, that would be great.
oh, Peter, are you the Peter that I was messaging with? About the personal doc group? Okay, cool.
Exactly. So we want to get you on board later this summer.
Yeah. I've been emailing you. I think your email is, well, I'll be in touch with you. I'll DM you.
Anyway, yep.
Cool.
So
right,
great stuff. Thank you.
You're welcome. So before I jump into Peter and Ansley's questions, I wanted to just real quickly, there was a question from Nancy who said, how did you make $720,000 with your film, My Ascension, the teen mental health documentary that I'm leading the distribution on? And, how did you make that money showing at hospitals? Here's the breakdown. There's going to be, so one thing I didn't mention earlier when I brought on screen all the money we made with Age of Champions, there were 17 sources of income, 17. With My Ascension, we're already at like 10. And I think that's a key thing I want you all to think about. When we started our filmmaking careers, we probably thought, I'm going to make a great film, people are going to love it, and I'm going to get a big fat glistening check from one person, and then it'll be brought up, my film will be brought to the world, and then I can make my next film. That's kind of like the dream, right? And so the reality is that filmmakers that are making it right now, putting money in their pockets and telling their stories and getting impact going, they are bringing in revenue from 4, 5, 6 different sources. So with My Ascension, 260,000 of the 720 we've raised came in the form of PBS sponsorships. It's called underwriting. It's something I talk about a lot with Show and Tell. Free resources, check out on our website. Another big area that probably the second biggest area at this point, are educational resources, and specifically something that we kind of started doing about a year ago, and I think are pioneering, and maybe there's others doing it too, I'm not sure, but there's something I'm calling right now virtual toolkits. Virtual toolkits are basically pieces of our film like short clips, maybe like a series of 6 clips, sometimes the full film embedded on a website, along with maybe short educational clips that a partner has created, all on one simple web page, branded with that partner's logo and colors and fonts and all that sort of thing. And and the idea is that that partner can share this virtual toolkit with their community, their network, their students. And I'm just going to share my screen really quickly because this is kind of a new idea, and I know it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around. But this is one we made for Children's Hospital in New Orleans. They paid $25,000 for this. It's basically clips of our film, My Ascension. It is clips that they created as well about depression, mental health, anxiety, just really simple. These are just Vimeo embeds on a Squarespace page, real simple. And a message from the CEO, a couple other downloadable PDF resources, and this is a virtual toolkit. It's just a Squarespace page that looks like something they created, and they can share it. They have a network of over 100 schools in the state of Louisiana that they provide healthcare services to, and they share this toolkit with folks. So
That reminds me that the D-Word and Show and Tell will be co-hosting a webinar next Thursday. That you might want to put the link in if you can.
I just
On
put it in the chat, Doug.
Okay, on educational sales, virtual toolkits, the whole kit and caboodle. So, and another free one. So,
And so this is another free webinar a week from yesterday. So Thursday the 20th at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is the standard show and tell webinar time. We call it the future of educational sales. Educational sales have changed ever since Canopy got in the game. Prices have been going down on traditional licenses. And this is something, to Nancy's question, how did you raise all this money so far? PBS underwriting, and then these virtual toolkits. We've sold them to University of Pittsburgh, to a large church fellowship in Atlanta, to other community groups that want to use the film and share it this way. So the link to RSVP for the webinar is in the chat. And then, Camille just asked, can you share the example again? We're going to talk about that ad nauseum next week. So please come to the webinar and we'll discuss. So let's jump into Peter and his questions. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Go ahead with that, and then Taki will get to you after that one.
Great. Peter asks, other than feature documentaries, what formats are becoming more feasible and sustainable for doc filmmakers? What's so interesting is actually one of the first things I tell feature documentary filmmakers is that they've got to cut a shorter version. A feature length is actually, in my opinion, an outdated length. It's becoming an outdated length.
Yep.
It is mostly useful for festival programmers and theater programmers, which are two of the least relevant in terms of distribution, communities of people. Shorter form content, shorter form versions of our documentaries are better for classrooms. They're better for partners. They're better for conferences. They're better for advocacy work, because it leaves time for Q&A, it leaves time for interaction. So, I would say, in addition to shorter, and I think you'd be surprised, there was a filmmaker in my community that raised over $500,000. Her film was 23 minutes long. And, working with partners and doing creative things, doing virtual events. Also, something that's been happening more and more of a taste of the, and this was a question from Clemencia, was like, I'm seeing mostly films about violence on Netflix. Are there any ideas of what their programming priorities will be in the future? And connecting that question with Peter's question, I think serial content is going to be more and more important. I did a webinar with a prominent international sales agent and distributor called Espresso, Rebecca amazing. And she talked about the fact that a lot of television networks in the UK, in South Africa, in Australia, Canada, wherever, they're actually interested in serial content more than one-off because they are going to promote this new content. And if it's a one-off, they only get one bite at the apple to get audience to watch it and basically to see their advertising. And so when it's a series, if there's even 2 parts, and they define a series as 2 parts or more. So in the first time in my whole career, in the last 6 months, I've advised a couple filmmakers, hey, I love your feature, but feature length isn't the right length. How about 2 hour longs, or 2 45 minutes, or 2 52 minutes, or 3, 26 minutes? Making serial content actually, I think, is going to be in the growing in taste. And I think, as to Peter's question, taste of the streamers and television buyers, but also to, give more opportunities for filmmakers of that format.
Thanks, Keith. Taki, come on camera.
Well, first of all, thank you. This has actually been incredibly helpful. I tuned in today on a whim, and I think I'm going to be coming back regularly. So thank you. Keith, I'm actually going to change my question based on the answer you just gave, which was, we keep on hearing today about how young people aren't watching TV anymore. They're watching on their phones, they're watching on TikTok, all of this kind of stuff. From a distribution and sales point of view, and I guess you inspired me by saying that feature length isn't as relevant anymore. I mean, how do we factor that into thinking about how that could be something we could monetize and get distribution on, whether it's creating smaller films or even creating distribution or marketing using those methods?
Well, it's so interesting, Taki. It's a really good question. And I think, to be honest, I think that there are probably ways to do it that I haven't seen or thought of yet. And what I would say to you is be flexible, be creative, experiment. One of the key things that have always guided my career, and I think what's helped me make a lot of mistakes, I make so many mistakes. I'm distributing 3 films right now. One of them is hard. I'm kind of tumbling. It's like, damn, my first ideas aren't working. But here's the thing, is that when I'm experimenting with a new format, with a new film, if I'm running distribution, if it's an audience that I'm not really sure about yet, if I'm not sure what conferences or partners, I take an approach called an MVP, a minimum viable product. It's a term in entrepreneurship where it's basically, before you spend so much time and energy into creating a 2 or 3 part series out of your feature based on some advice this weird guy Keith said in a webinar, before you do that, experiment a little bit. Do a minimum viable product, meaning don't spend a bunch of time, energy, color correction. Don't do until you've maybe done a super rough cut with your editor and be like, boom, boom, boom. Let's break it up real dirt, just quick and dirty. Break it up. Let's watch it back. Let's get some feedback from a couple friends. Let's maybe show it to a couple people, maybe the first installment to someone who we think is in our target audience. I see you're here in LA. It's like, maybe you have a contact at a friend at UCLA who teaches in that area. Maybe you could say, hey, could you take a look at this 26-minute, first part of my film? I'm thinking about making a series. I'd love to get your advice on it, because I think it's going to really resonate with professors like you. Do the minimum viable product approach. And that applies not only, talking to your question, but to a lot of the things that we do. I talk to so many filmmakers who take advice from, people like me, and, I'm giving advice based on a lot of experiences, and each of you are going to have to manifest this in a slightly different way. And so I really want you, before you even follow my advice or anyone else, Doug's advice, anyone's advice, do it a little bit, do it in the minimum way that's viable, and show it to someone, a human, get some real feedback, hopefully a few humans, get some real feedback before you spend more time and energy there. So, Taki, I know that was kind of a sideways way to answer your question, but did that cover it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Steve.
Thanks so much for taking the question, and thank both of you for the tremendous work you guys do. I enjoy these sessions, and Keith, I'm a member of Show and Tell, and thanks for the feedback you gave me on my deck from a few
I
weeks
remember your
ago.
deck well. I remember your deck, Steve.
So much better. So I just wonder, and this is maybe a little to the side, but at the same time, it rings a few bells with the things you're always talking about, Keith, which is PBS, a foundation, and hooking up with them, and it's just the incredible success of 20 Days of Mariupol, which it's a guerrilla documentary. I mean, there's hardly any talking heads. There's no super lighting. I mean, it's a guerrilla doc, but of course it had Frontline actually sponsoring these AP reporters in Mariupol at the beginning of the Ukraine war. So they just have this incredible footage, incredible story, etc. Does that inform anything we're talking about today for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that doc. I saw it at Sundance. I think it puts so much heart and face and just emotion into what's happening in Ukraine right now in a way that I think is a reminder of how important it is for us to do the work we do. I mean, not all of us are risking our lives like those filmmakers did, and neither should we all do that. But at the same time, investigative journalism and journalism in general is changing, and frankly, is atrophying, and it's important for we filmmakers to step up and do what we do, which is insane. We embed ourselves in places. We spend years to tell a story, and frankly, that doesn't fit into the corporate model very well. So what that film team did, they deserved the Oscar, and that was a fantastic doc. I love verite docs like that, where it is that kind of more raw, talking heads. Here's a couple things I'll say about it that are relevant to our conversation. Does anyone here? I was there when at Sundance when they were acquired by PBS, and PBS has been acquiring more films out of Sundance, which I think is kind of interesting, and not for big budgets, big acquisition fees, but still acquiring them with audience and some sort of fee. Guess how much that film, Oscar winner, made in theaters?
Not much.
$0.
Zero.
And maybe just expanding out for all the nominees for Best Documentary this last year, the top grossing film, a great film out of, I think it's Chile, about dementia, picked up by MTV. They're the top grossing doc. The titles escape me. Eternal Mind. You can Google it and find it, but that film was the top grossing doc that was nominated for an Academy Award this year. $67,000 in theaters. Eternal Memory. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you. That's it. Eternal Memory made $67,000. Everyone else made less. There are a couple of docs that made a lot of money at theaters over this last year, but they were about Beyonce and Taylor Swift. Then look at the rest of the list. There's also some weird Christian ones too, like that are we don't hear about that often. So, but here's the thing, even about those Christian films, here's the thing. They're kicking butt in theaters because they have a target audience. It's definable, it's organizable. They're probably doing some Facebook ads and they're, selling tickets. I think that it's really, same with the music docs. So I think there are a few things to pull away from the Oscar winner this year, and that's that the way these films are the top films in the documentary field, the way they're achieving success looks very different than 5 years ago. The Oscar winner 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they were grossing decent amounts at theaters. But people don't go to theaters to see documentaries anymore. And the films that are making money in theaters are usually doing short runs. They're not doing week-long runs, they're doing single day, they're doing special events, they're eventizing, they're tapping into target audiences, Christians and Swifties, whatever. And it's really important takeaways, I would say.
Ty.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Keith. So going back on what you talked about, how it's not really about so much maybe a person, but more of an idea or subject matter, social issue like you talked about. I bet one or two other people on here have the same exact style of film as me, the same subject matter as me. The person might be different. That's the only difference. So how are you making your film sound and look different to these conferences, to these other people, when you know that there's 100 other people making the same kind of film?
Well, that is a really, really good question and very relatable. And I know how heart-wrenching it feels to think like, man, how am I going to compete? How am I going to get my film out there in this tough marketplace? Plus, there's other films that might be kind of similar or we might get bunched in. That's a tough pill to swallow. I can relate with that because my film about the Senior Olympics, when as we were doing the color correction and sound mix and spending all that money so we could do our festival premiere at AFI Docs, another film about the Senior Olympics got released. And I was like, wait, what? I read about it in like a Hollywood Reporter article. I was like, oh my God. And they have PR behind them. We had no PR. We're very guerrilla. And I remember feeling just panicked and just absolutely panicked. And here's the thing, you know, many years later, many filmmakers and audiences know about Age of Champions. And I don't know of anyone who's ever talked about Autumn Gold, the other film. Worst title, I'll say that. No offense to the filmmakers, but I think here's the thing, it's very uncommon. Look at the Fire Festival, that silly series. Two documentaries dropped at the same. Look, a few years ago when Waiting for Superman won I think they won best documentary that year about charter schools and public school debate. And then there was also a film called The Lottery that was at Sundance that same year at the same time. They both premiered at Sundance. There were two films about science fairs a few years back. So don't worry about the competition. Focus on you. And here's the thing I would say, and this is true even if you don't have other films that are of similar topics. You have to always be able to communicate. Doug's mentioned a couple times pitching and how to pitch. And again, I have a bunch of free resources about that on our website. When we are pitching, we have to always be able to talk about why our film is unique. We have to always be able to. So your film is unique, guaranteed, Ty, guaranteed. And you will need to figure out how to articulate that. Even if you didn't have other filmmakers, nipping at your heels about a similar topic, we have to understand, why is our film unique? If we can't talk about that in a way that's convincing with a potential partner, we're at a significant disadvantage. So our uniqueness for our film, it will also inform the uniqueness of our distribution strategy. I've said this before during this webinar. Each of you is going to have a different distribution strategy. They're all different for the 120 people, 128 different strategies. For the 3 films I'm releasing right now, they all have completely different strategies. And it's the same person running, same team running the distribution. So you have to understand uniqueness of your story, which will inform the uniqueness of your fundraising and your distribution.
I see 6 hands raised. We have a limited amount of time left, so let's try and do this really quickly. And I don't think we can take any more questions beyond the people who've already raised their hands. So Nancy, you're muted. You need to unmute, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Keith, thanks. Your generosity is just wonderful. My question, when you speak of going to conferences and et cetera, do you just like go and mingle with the crowd? Do you bring a trailer? Do you bring a pitch deck? Do you bring anything? Like what's your strategy for how do you work these conferences so that you're just not another face in the crowd?
It's a really good question. Hello, Nancy. I would say that there are a lot of different ways to find success at conferences. And I know this because I've experienced firsthand a lot of different ways to participate. So maybe the gold standard way that we want to, you know, where all the stars align and we have our pick of the litter of what to do. The main thing you would ask for is doing a plenary session. Plenary just means everyone at the conference. A plenary session, ideally a keynote, where you, even if you have a feature, you show 15 minutes or less of your film, and then you have time to do a Q&A, a conversation, and then give kind of, you know, your pitch where you're talking about your impact campaign and how people can get involved. That's the ideal. And plenary is important because I know a lot of filmmakers who come to me and say, Keith, I went to this conference on your advice and it sucked. Nothing happened. I spent a bunch of money. It was a big disaster. And usually in those situations, if they are invited to screen their film or show their film or lead a conversation, they're invited to lead a breakout session, which means, you know, there's 6 or 7 happening at the same time. So if there's 1,000 people at a conference, there's maybe only 100, 150 in the room, maybe. And then the filmmaker makes the mistake of showing their whole film. So if they have an hour-long slot, they just show the film the whole time. They don't even talk. They don't tell someone, hey, this is what we're doing with our distribution. This is our vision. This is how you can get involved. Here's some examples of others that have been involved. And here's the next step you can take to join our campaign to change the world in the way that you care about too. You know, that when filmmakers have a good experience, they're usually reaching a lot of people at a conference, ideally all of them. They're able to use short portions of their film in conjunction with their call to action, is what I call it. And you know, everything else is kind of a bonus. So, you know, I do recommend people bring postcards that maybe look like, you know, artwork on one side, contact info, and maybe your short synopsis on the back, QR code to your website. QR codes are becoming more useful, even for older folks. And then the other thing I would say too is I've also gone to conferences on the other end of the spectrum, where the conference was coming up too soon. There was no speaking slots available. And I went to a conference, and what I did beforehand is I got a program and I did reverse research, and I looked up who were all the funders, who are all the keynote speakers, who are all the hot shots that were going to be there. And I reached out to all of them and said, I'm going to be at this conference. I know you're going to be there too. Would love to meet you. Our film is about this. I see you do work that's relevant. Do you have time for a quick 5-minute meeting in the expo hall? You know, and a lot of those folks wouldn't respond, but then I would see them, you know, or I would go to their booth, and then I would go just meet with folks. That's how I connected with 23andMe at that genealogy conference. I was invited. I went and paid to go. They didn't pay us. They didn't give us a keynote or a plenary. I just went, but we knew all the big companies that were going to be there. We were able to meet with a couple. We met with like the low-level front desk person at 23andMe at the conference booth. They gave me a business card. I followed up, and several months later, we had a meeting with
Polite persistence.
Polite persistence makes the world go round.
Right. And by the way, all the stuff, I mean, Keith's webinars at Show&Tell go so deep into all of this stuff. So if you didn't get the full answer, you'll take a deep dive in those. Cindy, is that how you pronounce your name? Sorry if it's not.
Yeah, that's right, Cindy. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for your time. So much of what you said is really useful. So thank you so much. So I have a question. I'm trying to figure out how to put this the easiest way. When you're looking for partners, people to collaborate with that are part of other companies, I would assume that you have to do that after your film is finished. Is that the case? Or I'm thinking of like ITVS, the way that I was in a cycle and I had heard about another doc that they were going to fund. And at the last second, they were like, oh, we can't fund you because they had a $50,000 donation from an advocacy organization. And it just looked like too much of a special interest even though they didn't have any creative input or any ownership in any way, shape, or form. And so that made me really put the brakes on a very large donation that I was about to get, because I was afraid that it was going to be seen as, you know, kind of a for hire film, which it isn't. It's like a 10-year long documentary. So what's the trickiness around that?
It's really frustrating too. And is it Cine?
Cine, yeah.
Cine, that's really frustrating because I love the folks at ITVS. You know, I think I actually for my second film got a grant from an open call grant, and that was really helpful, like big time. And so the thing that frustrates me sometimes with grant makers is this series of rules that don't seem to take into account that we're filmmakers trying to make a living, and so that can be frustrating. And whenever I have the ear of my friends at some of these big organizations, I let them know that. And you know, like again, I love POV and independent lens, but it's really hard and maybe near impossible to get PBS to get underwriting. You know, get your own sponsorships, which is a big revenue source for filmmakers. And so here's what I would say for you, Cine, is I would not, I hate the saying because I love nature, bird in the hand. The chances of getting an ITVS grant, again, talking to leadership over there, you have a better shot at getting into Harvard, you know, and want to go back to college. And so it is, if you have an active, enthusiastic target audience partner who is not going to have any editorial say, because that could be an issue for a PBS broadcast and that sort of thing. But, you know, I'm sure you understand that, don't want that. No one wants anyone giving any say creatively, any sponsor giving any say. I don't believe in that. But at the same time, if you have someone who's enthusiastic and excited, wants to support you, I've learned that the most likely support you're going to get in the future is from people who've supported you in the past. You know, there was a filmmaker in my community who was desperate for final finishing funds. And, you know, and he'd done a good job of finding donors for his film about the foster care system. And I said, and he's just like, oh, I'm doing reverse research. I'm doing polite persistence, Keith, it's not working. I need the 6. And I said, go to your donors and say, listen, I have an opportunity for this PBS broadcast. I need help with the final costs to deliver. You know, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I need. Guess what? He raised $70,000 from donors that had already supported him because they believed in what he was doing, and they had this great opportunity for bigger audience to tell a story they cared about. So honestly, as much as I want you all to get ITVS grants, and I'll apply to ITVS in the future too, but the reality is you will probably have a better ally who will be more engaged with you through your journey than ITVS if you find a partner who's like, we're in, you know, we want to support you right now. And so I think if you, and here's the thing, maybe they support you in a way, and in the agreement, the support agreement, you make very clear there's no editorial say, this and that's something that can support you. Because I think with public television, because ITVS is an arm of public television, they have a lot of rules, but there's subjectivity to the rules. So if you can say, I did my due diligence, I saw that nightmare scenario for that other producer, the story you just told us, Cindy, and I did my due diligence. Here's the agreement they signed before they supported us, and we are completely protected from that. I think that's a good way to also get that supporter and protect you in case you can get that grant from ITVS.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
the ITVS.
I've got to cut you off because we still have a few questions here, and we're running out of time. But thanks for your question. Philip, before you ask your question, I just want to acknowledge you. People have mentioned in the Sabbath Queen, Sandy Dubowski's film in the chat, you were on that as an editor for 4 years plus. It's an amazing film, and I just wanted to congratulate you.
Oh, thank you, Doug. Yeah, Sabbath Queen at Tribeca Film Festival. Check it out. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Keith, for all this information and for all your. I've been a member of Show and Tell for a long time and got so much out of your webinars. So, quick question would be: is there a way for us to estimate perhaps the market. So if we think of this partnership, seeking partnerships thing as a marketplace, is there a way for us to estimate how much our film could reasonably earn? Because it's hard to know, okay, well, I'm going to devote in the next 6 months to this because I think I might be, a regular market publishes all the numbers. Here's how much all these films made, and I can say, oh, my film's kind of like that, so maybe I can earn that. How do we do that with this model?
Great question. I love Sandy, by the way, and I haven't yet seen the final cut of your film.
Yeah.
To see it, Philip.
Yeah.
That is a really good question, and I would say that there is not a really scientific way to. I mean, it's sort of like all those projections are just kind of fakery anyway. Like look at the. I mean, does anyone, whenever there's a box office flop, does anyone ever, the projection, you laugh, you'll have a good solid laugh when you look at their projections versus the reality. Or I always say, if I want to have a good laugh, I will look at my notes of my distribution plans for a film 2 years ago, because it's wildly different, because realities are just so different. What I would say though, Philip, is that the way that I would make, okay, two things I want to say. One, budget for outreach. I believe, and I'm vegetarian, so it's kind of ironic that this is a slogan of mine, but I believe in slow and low. It's a reference to smoking meat. Slow and low. Slow and low. This form of distribution is slow. For all of you that are in my community that have done this, it's slow. I know you and Sandy know it's slow to make a you worked on that a long time. And so I think that distribution is also slow because you're building relationships. Think of any relationship you have in your personal life, in your romantic life, in your professional life that is meaningful, where there's trust. It took time to build that. This form of distribution is similar in that it takes time. And so slow and then low, keep your overhead low. Some filmmakers make the mistake of hiring an impact producer that's expensive. Impact producers are expensive. They're like thousands of dollars sometimes a month. Don't do that. Like some impact producers are worth every penny. But I would wait until you have your strategy, you have your audience, you have some partners already, and the impact producer's goal is to expand on a strategy you've already proven. And so I think that what I would recommend you do when you're making projections is actually focus as much on how you can how can you project out your expenses and time to give yourself the time to build the relationships. And then when to think about what could the income potentially be, I would do a mix of things. I would look at comps, look at other films that are in the space, who they may have worked with, what they did, what they accomplished, how successful were they connecting with, people. And then I would do a little reverse research. I would look and say, you know what? Keith's crazy conference strategy has told me that there are big corporations or big philanthropies that are behind these issues. Or conversely, you're making a film about, I hate to say it, human rights or some topic that frankly doesn't have a lot of that support. It's a lot of passionate volunteers. And I would say you're going to make an important film that's going to change lives, save lives perhaps, but you may not have the financial, you may not, make a lot of money. So you're really going to want to keep it slow and low.
Keith, your answer brings up a question I've been meaning to ask, which is, others like Peter Broderick and John Reese, talk about the importance of building, distribution and outreach into their budgets. I mean, I've heard John's mention it should be like 25 to 30, up to 50% of your budget. But we as filmmakers, struggle to just even get, pay our crews, much less pay ourselves anything. The idea of raising money that we can't raise to make the film for this outreach just feels so overwhelming. So what do you advise in terms of that?
I think John and Peter are totally right that if you have the opportunity, what a luxury to raise the money that we need to make our film. Like, how many of you have raised money for your film before you made it, you know, and raised your whole budget? That's tough. So to tag on top of that another 20, 30, 40, 50%, or 20, 30, 40, $50,000 even for distribution seems like crazy talk. I agree with that strategy, but it's just not a reality for a lot of filmmakers. I think that's the reason that I like being involved in distributing a couple films as I teach, because it keeps me really grounded on the practicalities of this all. And so what I would say is it's a great aspiration and we should do it. And if we have a nice benefactor or patron or someone who can support our film, I think letting them know that you also care a lot and are thinking a lot about your vision for the distribution of the film, that actually can help you raise more money. So what I mean by that is when we have our elevator pitch, I talked about this in my show and tell webinar yesterday. When we have our elevator pitch, you should be talking not just about the arc of your story, but the arc of your distribution. And at the same time, basically in the same breath. And so I think, to me, that is something we can do and doesn't cost us money. So rather than, what I hate happening is taking what John and Peter advised, which is correct, and I would like that also, but the reality is it's not going to happen for most of us. And what I don't want is filmmakers to say, well, I can't raise that distribution money, so I'm just not going to think about distribution right now. What I want you to do is I want you to do things that are free. Work on articulating a simple, definable, concrete, convincing vision for your distribution. Even
I'd
if
like
it's
to be
just
remembered
hypothetical.
as a good guy instead of a.
So that's what I would say. Work towards the money stuff, but you can work on your pitch for free.
Great. Keith, do you have time to hang in for two
Absolutely.
questions?
Ansley's been real patient, and
Yes, she has, as has Christine.
We'll talk with both of them. And then I'll put in the chat right now my personal email address and website for Show and Tell with free resources. And then also just, a reminder about the link to register for the webinar that we're co-hosting next Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific on virtual educational sales in the future.
Great. Take it away, Ansley.
Thank you guys so much. I'll keep it short. I think part of that distribution arc is not only showcasing understanding of your audience, but I think we owe it to ourselves to really understand our audience. And I think so much of that, especially as a creative, feels and seems intuitive, but that doesn't translate in a pitch to a potential underwriter. And actually, I think that's a stereotype that really hurts us very often, is that we're overly qualitative as we're presenting, for example, how would they benefit? And how is what I offer unique? I think part of what filmmakers or real filmmakers can offer that's unique is an understanding of audience. But I don't really hear I don't know personally, even though I spend so much time researching this kind of thing, what are actually great resources for understanding your audience. And I'm curious about the docuseries approach, specifically 20-minute episodes.
Yeah, well, I think 20-minute episodes, docuseries, that's great, because you can very easily adapt by making it slightly longer for public television. You can slightly shorten for, social media. You can do a lot. I think it's a really smart, for the way distribution is heading, I think that's a smart format. And so to your question about audience identification, it's one of the hardest things. It's hard for me. The only way that I've figured out how to do it in a way that's actually proven to work is I recommend talking to people. I know we don't like doing that. We don't like to be vulnerable and show people our project sometimes before it's done. But what I advise filmmakers to do is actually show people what I call just, not just people, not friends and family. Their advice is almost useless. And it's just they're outliers. What I recommend you do, no matter what stage, and ideally earlier in the filmmaking process, I recommend you make a list of audiences, but not a complex list. It could be 5 different definable audiences, and make a list, the top one being your top hypothesis of who your audience really is, who's going to care most about your film. And then I would recommend you do the weird, crazy thing of finding someone in that community and showing them some of your footage, ideally short, something short. Even 20 minutes is too long. I would show them, like, even just a trailer, even a 6-minute teaser, a sneak peek, and show it to them and talk to them about it. Practice your pitch, hear how it lands. For the film Thank You for Coming, where we eventually made that partnership with 23andMe, before we had that success, we had a bunch of failures. We made a list of audiences, and at the top of the list, the director and I put marriage and family therapists. Because the film's about finding her father, eventually connecting with him, and having that be really complicated. And so marriage and family therapists. So we were both in LA. We looked up what was the LA chapter of Marriage and Family Therapists Association. When were they meeting? We drove across town to Brentwood, to some crappy strip mall there, and we went to this meeting, and it was super awkward. We negotiated just like show the trailer to the gathering of 20 people, and we were so convinced they were top of our list, our number one audience. And guess what? No one was interested, because we learned that marriage and family therapists have specializations, and no one was specializing in the mental toll on their patients from looking for their sperm donor father from 40 years ago. That's just too, they were like, no, we're dealing with kids with trauma, or we're dealing with divorce, or so that was like, okay, cross it off the list. But you know what, we would have spent so much time and energy and doing Keith's fancy reverse research and polite persistence and never giving up on the wrong person. See, that's when polite persistence backfires, when you're like, I haven't really tested this theory, but I'm going to obsessively bug this person for months because it worked for Keith that one time. But turns out you're just reaching out to the wrong person, because you didn't drive down the street and talk to some real person there. I mentioned earlier, I think it was Adam. Was it Adam? Or no, it was Taki, who, was asking about his film. And I said, use the minimum viable product approach. He was in LA. So it's like, go down to UCLA, talk to your friend who's a professor there, show him a clip, talk to him about it, and get there and get his input. And then maybe go across the street and go to USC and talk to a professor who's a stranger in that same area, and talk to them about what they think. So I think that's what I would do. That's what's worked for me. People have been trying to figure out tricks and shortcuts and apps and this, and none of that works from my vantage point. You got to just pound the pavement.
Thanks, Ansley. Wrap it up, Christine.
Okay, first, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Keith. I was just going to tap in for a minute, and here I am the whole time. Anyway, so I've done sort of reverse, you call it reverse research. I sort of went more business, reverse engineering. So we are just beginning production in our film, and we actually established partnerships formally with some nonprofits like the National, I'll say who they are and then you'll know what the film's about. The National Coalition for the Homeless, Covenant House, a food bank here in LA. And we're looking for a couple of others, a veterans organization. But I'm wondering, so credibility to me is part of it, plus also partnering them and bringing them into it. Along the same lines, I'm wondering if you've had experience with accelerators or labs like Chicken and Egg or Sundance Catalyst or things like that, because that's another track that we're applying to or looking into for the similar reasons that my question is, have you done that, and has it helped in terms of your outreach and I'm a big relationship person, but just wondering what your experience is in that. And thank you. And I will be here on Thursday.
Great. We'll see you Thursday. Christine, it's a great question. And I think here's the thing, documentary filmmaking is hard, takes a long time, and we don't make much money. Even if we're successful with my model, we're not making millions of dollars. You're never going to get rich as a documentary filmmaker. I'm one of the best at monetizing. I'm not rich. And so I think that the big thing I would say is part of the joy of being a filmmaker is connecting with our community. So we have a wonderful community. I live in LA, and so our show and tell community is almost exclusively virtual, but we're doing like a meetup, in about a week in North Hollywood. And it's just like, I'm excited to just meet some of these people I've mostly been connecting with on Zoom. And so when I look back at my career, as a filmmaker, going to the IFP Spotlight on Documentary, going to Working Films, and they did these groups of filmmaker fellowships. Chicken and Egg, I know a lot of filmmakers have gone through Chicken and Egg. They're fantastic because you make connections with filmmakers, you make bonds with filmmakers, you hire some of these folks, they hire you on their projects. That's one of the joys of doing this kind of difficult job. And so I would highly recommend you do it. I wish there were more opportunities like that where we could gather small groups of filmmakers to connect, to commiserate, to vent, and to support each other. D-Word offers that. And they do. I know they mentioned at the top, Julie and Doug mentioned at the top that there's some in-person ones. I saw the email coming up, and that's fantastic. I would highly recommend just anytime we can get to, and that's why festivals are great because you meet other filmmakers. So I would recommend you prioritize that. And it is beneficial for your career too. But the reality is that there's just no shortcut to doing what I said to Ansley, which is you got to pound the pavement. We filmmakers are really good at finding ways to procrastinate doing things that we know we should do, but we don't really want to do. So maybe if I do this fellowship, or maybe if I, do this, if I read this article, like I don't have to, I get to postpone reaching out to strangers to talk about my film. That's really vulnerable. It's not fun. We avoid it like the plague, kind of subconsciously. At least I do, and I have to force myself to. One thing I'll say, last thing I'll say is I don't like reaching out to strangers to pitch my films, even though I do it all the time. So I have this little timer. I set it to an hour, and I don't get to leave my desk. I don't get to check the news. I don't get to look at my cell phone for an hour until I'm done with the distribution work that I had to do that day. I only work on distribution about an hour a day because I have a lot of other things to do, but that's enough. If you're doing it in a focused way and you're being discerning about what you're experiencing, and you're adjusting, you're crossing off marriage and family therapists, and you're focusing here instead, you can do a lot in a short period of time. So slow and low, stay focused. And that's kind of, the theme of this conversation was what to worry about and what not. Focus on yourself. Don't worry about all the stuff crumbling around us. Focus on doing what you know you need to do and will help you move the ball forward.
Let me just add that the D-Word, I mean, we're always eager and trying to help facilitate meetups in person of our members. So if anybody wants to have a meetup in their area, wherever it may be, send the hosts a message with, when and where, and we'll send out a targeted email to within 50 miles of wherever you happen to be. So I'll put in the chat, but that's info@dword.com, and that'll reach the 4 co-hosts, and we will work with you to make that happen. It happens all the time. We don't do it around a film just because, to promote a film, but if you're in a town where your film is showing and you want to have a meetup of members before the film, that's fine, as long as the main purpose is to meet and not just to promote. We're happy to do that. And let me put the date of Wednesday, August 28th in your minds and your calendars. That's when the D-Word is going to celebrate our 25th anniversary in New York. Venue to be announced. Be on the lookout for it. But we're also going to encourage people to have their own celebratory gatherings that week as well. But if you're in the New York area, it's going to be very special this year.
What's the date?
Wednesday, August 28th.
I'll be there.
Right before the end of the summer, right before Labor Day, when things start getting hairy and everybody gets focused on their work. It's kind of an end of summer thing as well. Keith, I have a whole list of questions I never got to, but you were amazing as always. It's just the wealth of knowledge that you have up there is astonishing. So, and the way you're able to explain it is admirable and so appreciated. If you look in the chat, you see how many people are really appreciating what you do. So we will see you on Thursday. Remember, next Thursday, Keith and Show and Tell, along with the D-Word, is co-hosting a webinar around educational sales. We'll dive a little deeper into the toolkit that he talked about. And next Friday, as always, we will be here. It's just going to be one of our, what we call face-to-face classics, where we meet in a kind of generally much smaller group than this, usually somewhere between 30 and 50 people from all over the world. And we go into breakout rooms and we just get to know each other, mix and mingle, commiserate, cry on each other's shoulders, whatever, and get help or advice. Everybody's very generous with their support and help. So hope you'll come back for that. The link is, if it's not in the chat, if you just go to dword.com, go to our homepage, d-word.com. The reservation links are right there at the top. Again, Keith, thank you so much. Just invaluable information that you go, and please, I urge you to go to Show and Tell. There's just like webinars, recordings, articles, all sorts of, and then there's the community site that I think is well worth what you pay for it. And we didn't even get into the virtual events that you host, Keith, but that's a whole other topic for that I meant to get to, but what can you do?
Next time, Doug. Thank you so much for your kind words, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the community that you cultivate, and you and your co-hosts cultivate and maintain and grow. And we need that right now. I think documentary filmmakers, we need that right now. And so I really appreciate all the hard work you all do.
Yeah, same here.